All right. Now, final question of the evening. The thing that I wanted to talk about, why we're doing this whole episode, because it's wild to me to just such an extreme level. How come we are now living in a world, and what's the secret behind Skyclave's Apparition's rise to the top? For those who don't know, it is a one white creature core spirit 2/2. When Skyclave Apparition enters the battlefield, exile up to one target non-land, non-token permanent you don't control with converted mana cost 4 or less. When Skyclave Apparition leaves the battlefield, the exiled card's owner creates an XX blue illusion creature token where X is the converted mana cost of the exiled card. I guess actually before I ask why is it good, my real question is, did you think this was going to be good when you saw this card during preview season?
We did talk about it, and I was stoked for this card as soon as I saw it.
We actually are both very big fans of spirits as a tribe. And so I think that's where our initial conversation started. I was like, oh yeah, like that feels pretty good.
And as a Death and Taxes player, I was just like, I'm going to blink this for days, and it's going to be amazing.
So then that gets to it. What, how did it get to the top? Why? I mean, obviously we just went through a bunch of decks earlier in this episode. A ton of them were playing it, from Heliod combo to the Urion Uro decks to the mono white infinity like lists. So it's seeing play everywhere.
I would call it a silver bullet, but it's actually kind of more of the golden gun, I think, in Modern. It just literally hits everything. I mean, you look at the top lists. You have Uro Omnath, you have Heliod Company, Rakdos Death Shadow. All those things have maybe one or two cards that won't get hit by Skyclave Apparition. You've got like Titan, you've got Karn, and that's about it, because everything in Modern is cheap. And so you just have the answer in your deck at all times, because you don't have to run in the sideboard. You can just run a main board, because it's at worst it's a 2/2 for 3. But most of the time it's a 2/2 for 3 and a removal spell for whatever permanent was causing you to lose the game.
And you ultimately, it's kind of that Oko effect, right? Remember when everything was getting elked in Modern? It's the same thing that's happening now. Everything's getting illusioned in Modern. Yep. Like, you don't care about the dinky little token that's happening, and so that's why you see it being put into different kinds of shells. So like spirits, Death and Tax, obviously able to take great advantage of this, being able to blink it with Flicker Wisp, anything. I played a brew with humans, and I was like, this is not that hard to cast in humans. Like, I know it's double white, but
you got Ether Vial.
File it in at 3 too. It's a creature, so.
I think what's interesting about it is that this is one of the things that for years we've talked about, and it's like, if you're trying to evaluate if something is going to be worth money or something's going to be powerful, one of the first and best things to do is to figure out how many things like this have existed before. How different is this from the things that it's aping, right? Like, if this is coming down and it's supposed to feel like other cards that have been printed, is this doing something distinctly different? And it kind of is. There's not a lot of things like this that are doing what it's doing, right? Like, it's sort of doing its best impression of some combination of an Oblivion Ring or, a Deputy of Detention meets like kind of the ability of like a Thought-Knot Seer, and the way that Thought-Knot Seer doesn't give back the thing it takes. And you can look at sort of all those different abilities, and you can figure out, very similar to how like Felidar Guardian, when it was printed, was like, the big thing here that's different about this card is that it's an immediate blink. So this thing comes down and does something that nothing else right now at its cost does. That's why this is good with Planeswalkers or anything else. It took a little while before that card fully 100% became what it is, but now it's played in this top deck. And I think that if you look at this card, Skyclave, like, yeah, obviously, if you can blink this card, get that same ability over and over again, and it says non-token, non-land permanent. It doesn't reference creature. The thing's gone forever. They don't get the thing back.
Yep.
Like...
Well, and that's something like to bring up Oko is a good point, right? Like, we learned last year that Beast Withining a thing every turn is too good everywhere, too good in every format. Having a Beast Within on a stick is too good, and this is doing that to one creature, but in a way that's even better, because it's more of an O-ring effect. That if they then deal with this threat, they get a Beast Within token. That can sometimes be worse. And then on top of that, like, all of the. And I'm going to forget all of their names, but they've now printed at least 5, if not more, like 3-mana white creatures that when they enter the battlefield, exile thing, O-ring on a creature, right? And like almost all of them.
Hunter or there's a million of them.
Yeah, and even the weird ones like Megara of Condor has seen play in Modern and like at one time or another, and all of them were just close to not good enough, because you get the creature back if you're able to answer it, and the creature's abilities are often so much more important than necessarily power and toughness. And the fact that this gets rid of a thing permanently, and then they get a token that, you know, the elk in this case does put it above and beyond what other kind of versions of this, things that were already close to good. Like Fiend Hunter has seen play in Modern. Like especially back in the Birthing Pod days, like these things have seen borderline play, and like Feldar Guardian, just that little bit of a difference that makes it a little bit better is enough to make it a card that was fringe to the best card in the format, and it's really interesting that just has been able to kind of accomplish that. The other thing I think that I wanted to bring up is like the Beast Within token, in the sense that a lot of Modern's power is being cheated into play, right? Like Goyf, and historically Goyf, Uro, even Monetary Swift Spear, Walking Ballista, Death Shadow. All of these are cards that aren't in their their converted mana because power toughness are not related. And the fact that this focuses on its converted mana cost more than anything else means that they're getting a creature that is just always going to be worse almost 90% of the time than whatever they put into play.
As opposed to like creatures that you target with like Deputy of Detention and they get rid of it. If you target a creature with an ETB because that's the only thing you can do, and they blow up your Deputy and they get it back and they're able to get an ETB trigger, like that is value. That is not great value. But if you're playing Apparition and they are able to blow it up, you don't care because you've taken care of. They're only going to get value once, so it's automatically like step above that.
Yep. Also, I mean, Modern's not a battle that is necessarily won often by like anything between a 1/1 and a 4/4 vanilla creature. It's just not like a super common way for the game to move, really. So them being left with that is sort of irrelevant in a lot of cases.
Tarmogoyf is sad.
Yeah, and what I was going to say, just really quickly, but I'll throw to you here, but just when you talked about Deputy, it feels like Deputy is the closest thing that has been printed to this. It was the thing that was sort of doing this before this, because, you know, this doesn't reference the same thing that Fiend Hunter or a lot of those creatures do, which is obviously a creature. You're like, Deputy was still non-land permanent. It's just the difference between that and this is so drastic. That's we always would talk about like Treasured Find versus like Eternal Witness, and like they're kind of doing a similar thing. One's cheaper than the other, but like no one's ever going to play Treasured Find in Modern. But Eternal Witness is one of the most played cards ever. You know, there's just something about that one text or whatever that pushes it over. So anyway, I apologize. Go ahead.
I was just going to say too, like I think creature decks in Modern have like been getting more and more powerful. Obviously, creatures keep getting pushed. That's just a thing that's happening in Magic. Like it or hate it, whatever, it's happening. And I think this also really pushes creature decks even more, because the answers that people used to have for creature decks, like Tron is going to bring in their bridges, or whatever. Like those answers no longer work because those answers are permanents that I can just eat. And maybe you get rid of my, my spirit, but that's fine. Your bridge is gone, and I can attack now. So I think that's been huge for making this card big as well, is because it just lets your creature deck do what it wants to do uninterrupted at a pretty good rate. So
I think I think something also that's interesting is metagame, right? Like it just happens that right now of the top 8, 3 of the decks are decks that really, really, really like ETBs or 3-mana creatures that you can fill your deck that have advantages to, like Uro Omnath is a deck about blinking creatures, and this is a creature that wants to get blinked. Heliod Company is a deck that wants to be able to play collected companies at instant speed and get creatures that are able to be used as answers, the way that Spirits used to use Spell Quellers with collected company. And Eldorami's Toolbox wants creatures that are good in different situations and are versatile. And this
mention it gets around the indestructible clause too, with
with Heliod and it's good against Teferi, and it's good. Like all of these things have these things that this card is good against, and so it's not surprising to me. Dryad of the Elysian Grove, even, right? Like you have these key pieces that you wanted to answer that it answers, and then also all of these decks are taking advantage of it in a way. And then like if you even look at what it's good against, like Rakdos Death Shadow, I said this card just houses Death Shadow because they're getting a 1/1 for 1 if they can get rid of this, and their entire deck is about making that 1 mana card into a 13/13. And like so it's really interesting how it's just so well positioned against what the metagame is looking like and what powerful cards Wizards have printed. And part of the reasons I did want to talk about it is, like, you mentioned this earlier, a white card is the best creature in Modern. And like people kind of talk about where white's position is. And I think that there has been a lot of work that is kind of not fairly talked about since last fall, that white has just gotten much better under the radar. And in reverse of that, there is an unfair statement that white's power level in 60 card Magic is not attached to white's power level in 100 card Magic. And by that, I mean, like, one of the reasons white was so bad last November, like in every format kind of across the board at the time, was because 2 years before that, white was the best color in Magic in every 60 card format because they printed Gideon, the 4-mana Gideon that just was like, this is better than everything else in every format. And so Wizards reacts as on a pendulum. So they're like, oh, okay, don't make any good white cards. We have to make the other colors better. But at the time, Commander was like, hey, white's bad still here. But now you're making bad white cards where all the other colors are getting so powerful that are like, that's an entirely different issue that we're facing. And white just didn't get any love. But I think that between Heliod, between Skyclave Apparition, that there's just a lot of cool stuff happening in white, and wanted to put a focus on it.
I think what I wanted to throw in on it as well is like, there's something like 13,000 unique cards available in Modern, or more than that now. I think it's such an enormous format that if you're trying to prepare for, if you're playing at a GP or a Magic Fest when they come back, or you're playing at like an event on Moto where it's going to be like mostly people playing the top cards, that's one thing. But if you're going to your local shop or you're just going blind into a field and you don't know what you're going to go up against, the idea that all of these problem permanents, the ones you guys were mentioning, like Ensnaring Bridges and cards like Ghostly Prison that make it really Blood Moon, these are cards that are difficult to deal with. The fact that you have a card that deals with not only their best creature, but those cards and Planeswalkers that are hard to deal with all together, like, I think the idea that it answers so many different things all at once and handles so many different places that you aren't anticipating. Like, what if you end up going against that deck I'm talking about that I built with Doubling Season and a bunch of 4-mana Planeswalkers, and you just aren't equipped to deal with a bunch of 4-mana Planeswalkers in your main deck, and you have this card? Like, it gets the job done in a way that very, very few others are able to as consistently as it. So it makes sense to me, but it's funny, Alex, that you and I kind of missed it a little bit in our estimation of it. We like definitely thought it was good, but we didn't think it was like this, obviously.
I think part of its appeal too is that it's great in the fair matchup, right? Like, you can play this on turn 3 after you've dropped your third land as a totally fair Magic card, and it's good. Like, it will probably get rid of something that you wanted to get rid of, and it's just good. But then you start doing things like the Uro deck's doing, or like Death and Taxes is going to do with it, or even Collected Company is going to do with it. You start playing at instant speed. You start playing it out of Ether Vial. You start blinking it in response to its own trigger. That's where this card just starts to go kind of crazy, and you get to do all these cool things with it that don't feel as fair. When you get to exile 3 things at a time, and they're all gone forever. That's a really good feeling, and does not feel fair to your opponent, I'm sure.
So I have a question for the class. I'm a teacher now, I guess. Is if they printed the drawback on this ability on 1 white instant, you make exile a creature, they get a XX token equal to their converted mana cost. Is that more? Where does that fall on the Path to Exile, Swords of Plowshare spectrum?
Creature?
Yes, yeah. It's meant to compete with Path to Exile and Swords of Plowshare, but it has the drawback of making this creature. Yeah, that's the question. I'm gonna each of you take a turn. Caleb, you go first.
I think
clockwise,
that might see play in like your sideboard as Path to Exile 5 and 6 if that's what your deck wanted or needed. I don't think that replaces Path to Exile, especially because you said it was 2 mana, yeah? Like one
mana.
Mana.
It is Path to Exile / Swords of Plowshare, but instead of them getting a land or getting life, they get an XX creature equal to converted mana cost.
Okay. I still think I run Path over that because sometimes you don't have a basic land, or sometimes I don't care if you go get a basic land. I just needed to not get hit by Death Shadow for 20 damage. So I think I still play. I still think it's Path 5 and 6 in the sideboard, maybe.
Well, I also think they get the creature once they get rid of Skyclave, once they get rid of it. So I think the thing we would have to maybe this would be like a 0/1 creature, Alex, that only targeted creatures and it could only play it like sorcery speed as opposed to an instant.
No,
where it exiles the creature.
I'm not necessarily trying to compare Apparition to this. I'm saying specifically this card as a different drawback for a Path variant to be printed. Is this better or worse than Path and Dark Swords?
I think it depends on the metagame. So if you look at now, like, is Path really great? You have so many ramp decks. You have Yorion, you have like the Titan decks that want land. So if you're progressing that kind of game plan for your opponent, probably going to be better in a certain metagame. Because like Oust and Condemn exist, right? Are we playing them? No, but we're playing Path.
They are. I think both of those are ostensibly worse. Right? Like Condemn requires a creature to attack, so it's not as versatile at answering threats that don't need to attack, and Condemn also needs that, but also puts it somewhere in their deck.
Oust, they get it. It's third from the top, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, like I said, I think it would just depend on the metagame, and then it depends. Because is it better to use that card later on in the game when, like, a CMC of 6 is swinging? At most, like Caleb said earlier, like most things are pretty cheap in Modern, so at most are you probably going to get 3/3s, 1/1s, like if that's the case. So maybe it is better than.
What it feels like to me is, honestly, if I think about exactly the card you're talking about, Alex, so what are the situations when you want to path something that you don't actually want to path something? And it's usually that you don't want to path a bird or a mana creature because like you're basically just ramping them, which is always a bummer. So like it's kind of bad there. So okay, I'd rather give you like a 1/1 in place of your bird for 1. I'm totally happy doing that. But like mid game or late game, often, sometimes it's to stop a combo. But if it's just trying to not die to like a creature that has power, I guess turning like a Tarmogoyf, like a 5/6 into a 2/2 is pretty good. But I also feel like if you're afraid of dying, then them having a creature is kind of bad for you. And most of the time, I'd rather my opponent just has a basic. I just don't. Sometimes it matters, but often it doesn't.
I think I'm with Kyle. I think it's better than Path. I think it is metagame dependent. I think yes. Like I think there's one point in the game where it's bad, but often that point in the game is also the point in the game where you dealing with a token is more feasible, especially like if you're a blue-white control deck, you have a Teferi there that now makes that token just not exist. These are decks that because I think this card's drawback is comparable to Birdsong. It's called Birdsong, right?
Birdsong.
Swan Song?
Which one?
Swan Song.
The 2/2 flyer.
Yeah.
The 2/2 flyer.
Yeah. It's like it exists. This card's real. It's a swan and not a bird. It's a better bird. I think it's fair to print. I think it's an interesting card to be printed. I think it's like if Wizards wanted to print Path to Exile into Historic or Standard, it would be the card that maybe I would look at, based especially on how much Apparition is seeing play in a fair way. Because I think that in Modern, you run into the problem that the decks that want you dead, the cards that they're attacking you with are often things that are small CMC but get big somehow. Either with white through equipment, which this would maybe be bad against, but mono red aggro, which like who cares if you exile their Swift Spear? It's now a 1/1. I would much rather face a 1/1 without prowess than Swift Spear against Death Shadow, turning their Death Shadow into a 1/1, right? Like kind of things we talked about. Even turning, like Heliod, if it turns into a creature into a 3/3, like there are things that it's good against, and sometimes you'll get blown out. And I do think it is metagame dependent. I think Kyle was right there, where but right now, pathing someone against Uro is real bad for me.
So bad.
Pathing something against like one of these an Eldorami's Toolbox deck that I'm looking at is bad. The Field of the Dead is one turn closer to murdering me versus giving them a 2/2 token. Like they'll have 2/2 tokens eventually. I'm dead regardless of those. So
I think on that note though, just to throw like the monkey wrench on the other side, because I think I hear what you guys are arguing. I think it actually makes pretty good sense that like most of the things in Modern, the common things, it actually is a pretty solid card against. And some things like a Primeval Titan, it's like, well, they have to have gotten the mana to get a Primeval Titan anyway. But I still could think of like exiling your Prime Time, exiling your Wormcoil, exiling your like Gurmag Angler, or like there's a lot of creatures where I'm like, that would suck. Like I want my Path to Exile that's in my hand to feel like it's like saving the day. I don't want to turn your 4/4 Omnath that's a problem for me into a 4/4. Sure. Like I don't want to just have to deal with a 4/4 now. Like this is supposed to save the day for me and I think, make you have more gas.
I do think we're talking a Thoughtseize Inquisition and Kozilek situation where it's like, which one of these is better? And it's so different depending on who you're playing against that I would probably find myself playing a 3/2 split a lot of the time. I don't think either of them are better. I think Swords of Plowshares is still better. Like that's the one card I do think just like doesn't replace either of these can compete with, but I do think that maybe there's a white it doesn't, because its drawback is like getting someone, if you're an aggro deck that's trying to use this to remove it out of the way, path is better than the life gain in this, because they don't get a blocker. So yeah, I think that the like, yes, Gurmag Angler is bad, but I'd much rather face a 6/6 token than a Primeval Titan forever, every day, for the rest of my life. We're just talking about a 20/20 for 4. This is a 6/6 for 6 that I'd much rather face as a token.
But it costs you a card, though. It costs you a card.
I would much rather face a 6/6 that made me discard 3 cards out of my hand when it entered the battlefield for 6 than a Primeval Titan. I would rather face a 6/6 that entered the battlefield and made me discard my hand and let me not draw a card on my next turn than face a Primeval Titan.
I think I don't know. I'm thinking of it, just trying to think of it in the different situations. Like if I'm behind on damage, like you've been hitting me with your big creatures or whatever, and this comes up, I don't want that. Like I don't want you to have another creature that you can continue to attack me with. I'm thinking kind of the same way. Where like if I'm the attacker, if I'm the aggressor, and you suddenly put down a blocker, and I have this, you still have a blocker. Maybe it's a less good blocker now. But like I still can't get in because I'm giving you this token.
Yeah, but then you just play Skyclave Apparition and
you can't get rid of the tokens with Apparition. Trust me,
I think the creature aspect is definitely one that I was definitely pretty familiar with. So I guess my question to wrap back around, or at least my final question on this topic is, often when something becomes the most played card or is the card for a while, the ban conversation starts immediately, and everybody wants to ask, is it too good? Is it too good? So what's your guys' opinion on Apparition? I mean, I'm not asking if we should ban it. I'm just asking, where does it feel for you in terms of like, is it ubiquitous because it's good, or is it ubiquitous because it's broken? Like, Oko is broken.
I think it's ubiquitous because it's good. It feels like a fair card. Having double white in the pips, like also like I think that's the balance. It feels like it's costed really well, and having it be a 2/2, so it dies to bolt. Like it just feels like a clean answer to a diverse sweeper of threats. So it's nice to have that. And, with white kind of being always the sideboard, it's nice to have like a main board answer that you can slot in and not feel bad about.
Yeah, I think overall it's a very fair card. Most of the time it's going to be used fairly. Like I said, most people are going to play it on turn 3 and it's going to get rid of the one thing, and then you're going to bolt it, and that's going to be the end of it. It's not a game-winning card. I mean, not in like the traditional sense. Like it's not a combo piece. You're not winning most of the time by attacking in with apparitions. It's an answer piece. It's a sideboard piece.
I think also
albino ape, where you're able to exile it and make 1 white mana.
I think like it's interesting that it also like the answer to this card is to play Gurmag Angler and removal, right? Like if this card is like, honestly, if I'm playing Death Shadow, I would really look at figuring out, can I get Gurmag Anglers back into this instead of Skyclave Apparition? Because Tron, or just like play Jund and just be like Bloodbraid Elf is if you want to get rid of this, it's a 4/4 now to your thing. I guess it could just block, but like I guess there's like, you just play thicker creatures is kind of the answer. So I guess as the last question, because I think we are running out of time, and we also kept you here late because we started late, and it's a carry from Ben's question, is there a card that you right now think is problematic in Modern? Like, is there a ban-worthy card, or do you think the format has kind of gotten to a really healthy position?
Where do we stand on Field of the Dead? Because I hate that card so much. That card for me is like just super frustrating, because you have to have very specific tech to interact with lands, and if you're not fast enough, that feels like a problematic card. Especially since they printed Dryad of Elysian Grove and all these other things. That's my like kind of most hated card right now in Modern. So
I hate to shout ban. I don't, I think generally we should avoid bans whenever we can. But having said that, like I'm looking at this meta page, and Titan is in 3 of the top 10 decks as like a major piece. And I think that's definitely a thing that's maybe not great for Modern. There's just so many different things you can do with it. And obviously with Uro and Omnath and the Dryad, like Kyle said, and then Field of the Dead, like that is just such a powerful piece. It just feels like anytime someone lands a Titan, the game is over. Like you should scoop and move on.
It's up there along with like Grape Shot and a few other cards of like this card has gotten more cards banned by being next to it in a deck than any other like most other cards in the format, or it's not necessary, like it always dodges it but something else gets taken out. And Grape Shot, just storm, insert whatever you want your storm. I think Grape Shot's the problem personally, but I think one thing that is interesting is, and it kind of like, if you get rid of Field of the Dead, it's a similar conversation, right? Is like Primeval Titan or Field of the Dead. I think Field of the Dead is the bigger issue between the two, just from a.
And we saw what it did to Standard.
Yeah, well, and removal doesn't work anymore for lands, right? They don't print the right stuff, and they just printed something that was really good, and even then, it's not doing anything because it's just like they're such hard to deal with permanent types. But it's interesting to me that like what I would, just looking at these lists, point out as like the unfun bad guys of the last 2019 to 2020 period, like are still look like they kind of are issues, right? Like you have Uro, you have Field of the Dead, you have Omnath is obviously doing things powerful. I think it's probably fine, but like those two cards to me are the ones that see like, okay, are these just like things, or and Teferi, 3-mana Teferi, are just like these things that are like bad in different ways. Like Teferi is not too good for the format, but I think it is just a miserable gameplay experience and just is always going to be that. And you're either stuck with it or they're going to print more cards like Apparition that are good against it to the point that it's no longer seeing play. And like, and just like going through the list, it's interesting how just like, I wish 2019 didn't happen in Magic in some ways.
I know. So much powerful stuff. You know, Alex, now that we've kind of opened up the channel, the MMcast, and we do a lot more stuff now that's cross format. I wonder if it'd be fun at some point for us to try to figure out what are the top 25 Magic cards ever, like all time. And I do wonder, is Primeval Titan a clear top 25 card ever?
Yes.
It is.
Card ever is harder. Sorry.
Not even in Modern. I'm saying card ever in Magic. And I think you could say the Moxen, the originals, they're all one. Like, I think you could say like fetch lands are one, dual lands are one.
I think that sort of thing. Top 25 cards of all time, Primeval Titan, to me, wouldn't make it. I think Primeval Titan... I could argue pretty comfortably that Primeval Titan is the best creature card ever printed.
It'd be an interesting conversation to have, and I'm wondering, would Primeval make it? Like it's such a uniquely powerful card. Like as you were just saying, it enables so many decks in a way that almost no other card ever has. I'm curious to know. It'd be a fun conversation to have. We should not do it now, but it's maybe something we should consider doing.
Does a creature make it into the top 25 Magic cards of all time? And that's like the thing that I'm questioning.
It's pretty busted, man. I mean, they're like, I think there's a handful. I think like that card. I think Snapcaster is somewhere. It's probably not top 25, but it's in that same conversation with it. I think there's a few. Yeah. It's a fun conversation. We should do it on another episode. Maybe we'll bring you in.
So to wrap up, thank you guys so much for joining. One last time, please let the internet know, or I can do it. I have the whole thing written down in front of me, so I can go through it quickly. You are Kyle and Caleb at Mr. Kai Guy. And it's here somewhere, and there's links everywhere. But Mr. spelled the way you normally would spell it, KYGUY, and at Spiny Mouse spelled MAUS. And thank you guys for joining. You guys both host the HighGround MTG YouTube channel. Also links below and hopefully on screen. And your Twitter for there is at HighGround MTG. So everyone, please check out their content's really great. They do a bunch of modern gameplay. We do Commander gameplay. They do a bunch of modern gameplay. Definitely check their channel out. And if you're watching right now, please like and subscribe. If this is the first time you've checked out this channel, if you are checking out their channel, definitely also like and subscribe. Just like go down and like every video. You don't even have to watch it.
We're 5 subscribers away from 200. Help us get there.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
And then beyond that, we do the podcast comes out every Monday, and we now do a live stream of our Commander gameplay, 7:30 p.m. PSD every Monday evening. Definitely make sure to check that out, both on YouTube and Twitch, twitch.tv/CastWiley, youtube.com/theMMcast. We are trying new things out where how video content is being released. Last episode, when we did our companion review, we released every color separately in 5 videos. In this episode, I think we are going to release these into multiple little chunks. So I'm definitely going to see how that works and let us know what you think. If we're doing that and you're watching videos now, let us know if you like the more consistent content release that are shorter, or you want longer ones, or just go listen to the podcast, the whole thing, or go listen to the podcast. It's all there in one big chunk. Or check out our Patreon where there's the raw feed. Today we talked about fantasy football with our guests. Lois can't win. We can't let Lois win. I don't need that. I don't need a dynasty in this business. Thank you again, guests. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Caleb. Anything you guys want to say before we sign off?
Thank you for having us.
This was great, and we're really excited to do it. So,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for doing it. We appreciate you coming. This was really fun to talk about Modern.
Great.
Definitely.
Bye, everyone listening and watching. And
bye, guys.
And whatever other senses. Touching. No, that's weird.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.